Hi, everybody, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live today. This is our first LinkedIn Live of 2024, so happy 2024 to everyone. I am so excited to be talking about our topic today, which is Drive-Thru Mania, a term that you used, Adam, in your book, although it's not the title of your book, Drive-Thru Dreams. But I'm so excited, Adam, about having this conversation with you today to really start to take a bigger picture look at our current state of health and well-being, how we got here, how we get out of it, and why some of the ways that we're approaching this really aren't working. And thinking about this also in the context of the workplace. A lot of the people who are listening in are really, working in the work environment, trying to bring well-being to the work environment as a way to promote better health and well-being more broadly. So first question I have to ask you, Adam, and I'm going to ask my listeners as well. What's your favorite fast food?
Oh, it's a tough one because as soon as I answer it, there's judgment right away.
Of course.
I like Taco Bell. I go right for the heart of the most polarizing chain probably out there. It's Taco Bell. People feel very strongly about it, and I like it. I just like it. It's my go-to.
And any particular favorite there?
I like the nachos, mostly the nachos Bel Grande, mostly because you have to sort of eat them within 5 minutes or you can't pick them up anymore. They kind of fall apart really quickly. So for me, it's almost like a challenge. But again, less Taco Bell than there used to be in my life based on where I am. But yeah, it still hits all those nostalgic notes.
Nice. So again, to our listeners, please share what your favorite fast food is. My personal favorite fast food item. I don't really have a favorite fast food restaurant. Maybe Wendy's. I used to love their Frosties, and I was a competitive gymnast growing up, and we would always stop at the drive-thru in Wendy's on our way back, and it was literally like that was what I looked forward to at the end of my 3-hour workout. It was like, we're gonna stop at Wendy's, and I'm gonna get a Frosty, and I'm gonna get French fries. So French fries are definitely my favorite fast food item. And it looks like Alana here is saying that she loves In-N-Out. So welcome, everybody. And just tell you a little bit about Adam. Adam is, of course, the author of Drive-Thru Dreams, our topic today, a journey through the heart of America's fast food kingdom. I love that description of it as a fast food kingdom. And you kind of pick up where we might say fast food nation drops off. Although I will say, I love that your book, it veers a little bit more on the reflective and a little less on the righteousness, which I think is something that we need. And you really, I love the way you look at some of the downsides, but also some of the upsides, some of the unexpected upsides, and including some of these awesome stories about some of these fast food founders, my particular favorite being Colonel Sanders, but also kind of how all of that relates to this cultural web of big cars, big highways, big corporations, and big hamburgers, and how that's not only happened here in the United States, but how that's happened all around the world. I certainly saw that when I was speaking in Kuwait. It's like Kuwait is like mini America. Big cars and lots of fast food. And none of that actually came into it really. Fast food restaurant McDonald's came in 1994. So it's like it happened overnight. Adam is also a former staff writer at The Atlantic, one of my personal favorites, and also has written for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Wired, Vox, New York Magazine, Time, and many others. All right. So Adam, tell us a little bit about the story behind writing this book.
Sure. Well, you hit on it a lot in your very kind introduction. For me, I grew up in Texas, where going to fast food places is not polarizing or controversial, really. Car culture is a huge part of life in places where you drive everywhere. There's not a lot of public transportation. It's not easy to get around. So I grew up with it in a way that I think a lot of people in the United States did. And then I moved to Brooklyn, and there was a very different attitude about it in terms of its necessity, in terms of its popularity, and in terms of all the big issues that kind of intersect with fast food when you talk about health and labor and the environment. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of write about how fast food kind of is this meeting place physically and metaphorically of all of these dividing and uniting factors in American life. And so that was kind of the impetus for it. I wanted to find out a little bit why people love it, in addition to the reasons we already know why people don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, you describe fast food, drive-throughs and fast food is kind of being a prism through which we can really better understand our history and kind of where we are today. I was particularly enchanted by how you talked about how this discourse really kind of mirrors a lot of other particularly political discourses, and the how polarized and fragmented we are today, and how partisan we are today, and how we can have a better understanding of that by looking at the history behind fast food and drive-through. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's hard not to notice that a lot of the criticisms of fast food tend to be a little elitist in tone, a little classist in tone. I think that's a big part of why people use it as a cultural signifier. In various campaigns, you'll often see a politician go to a fast food place and try to act like they are very much of the people, and that resonates for folks, in part because they're used to seeing this sort of industry as looked down upon by many cultural forces out there, without the understanding that there are reasons why these places are popular, and that's really meaningful. And so I think that thinking about it that way maybe should give us a little bit of pause in how we understand it.
And I have to say, one of my all-time favorite SNL skits is the one of Phil Hartman playing Bill Clinton.
Yeah, at the McDonald's. That's a great one.
But that really captures just, kind of how much these politicians are going into fast food restaurants as a way of really demonstrating how much they are, quote, of the people. So talk about this drive-through dreams culture, if you will. What is it? I mean, we talked about it a little bit high level with, summing it up as big cars, big highways, big corporations, and big hamburgers. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, the rise of fast food may seem extremely artificial in the way that we drive through around, highways and neighborhoods and places in this country, and you see these enormous chains that have bright signage and cheap food, and it's curious how it happened, but it was actually very natural how it popped up. In the aftermath of World War II, we have the building of the highways. The interstate highway system becomes this huge part of a national project, and car culture takes off. Cars have become more affordable, and there's no rationing on steel and gas after World War II. So people get in their cars and they start driving around on these new roads, and they start building the suburbs, so people have commutes. You see the rise of two-income households. So there's not necessarily one person staying at home and making all the meals anymore. So you have all of these various factors kind of evolve and take over in American culture. And that makes the need for food that's fast and affordable much more dire in a lot of instances. So there wasn't really a huge culture around dining out for middle-class folks in America until the post-war years. And we're talking about drive-ins, you're talking about diners. And fast food ultimately came to replace that because it was cheaper and it was quicker, and it gave people what they wanted, which was food you could kind of eat on your way to somewhere else.
And you describe this as a democratization of dining out, and that previously dining out had really been something just for the elites, people who it was a luxury. And so it wasn't just that the food was more affordable, it was just the whole ambiance was one that really was geared toward the working class American. There were no pretensions. And in fact, a lot of these colorful founders came from working class roots, and they sought out people that they mentored who also came from that working class background. So really bringing that to the forefront. So talk a little bit about that, and again how that ties to kind of where we are today.
Sure. Well, the history of fast food founders is the kind of thing I wanted to write a book about, because it feels so out of time with the way that we look at work today. If you think about the people who founded a lot of fast food chains, or even just open fast food franchises, individual stores, these were people who oftentimes didn't graduate high school, went right into the workforce, were not highly educated, didn't come from money, just had a work ethic and had a structure that made it possible for them to kind of succeed. So Colonel Sanders is obviously a great example of that. He was unsuccessful in his life all the way until his mid 60s. And
So
he was
there's
running
hope for all of us.
right, exactly. He was running a gas station in southeastern Kentucky, and then he became the second most famous person in the world and a national celebrity because of the showmanship and this fried chicken he'd been working on. Ray Kroc, Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, who was in countless ads, was a sort of mentee of Colonel Sanders, and he also similarly came from very humble roots. And so this really speaks to an American time where it was possible for some, again, not everybody, to work your way up. And that idea has been lost. That idea is something that we see less of these days. Part of why I wanted to write about fast food and why I've continued to write about work is because the people who say just by working hard they got to where they are isn't really true, because there were a lot of factors that helped people get to where they were. Their communities, the government, things that you don't necessarily see as visibly as you might, but the conditions were different. And someone who's starting out in fast food today as a cashier probably doesn't have the same opportunity to become the president or the owner of a chain or a franchise store.
You talk about how the fast food kingdom is the product of a century of competing forces, and this idea that we're kind of pawns, if you will, in a sea of these competing forces, and depending upon where those forces are going, that really shapes the extent to which we can really have access to social mobility, for example. And but let's talk a little bit about how this relates to our health and well-being. And again, what I really appreciated about your book is just how much you looked at some of the downsides, but also some of the upsides. And a quick pause here, just want to encourage people, feel free to pose any questions that you might have of Adam, and also any comments that you might have. So, when we talk about health and well-being, there's more and more recognition that it's more than just physical, but in fact, there are these multiple dimensions of well-being. So I'm going to walk through some of these different dimensions of well-being. And why don't you talk a little bit about how this rise of the fast food kingdom and this rise of Drive-Thru Dreams has impacted our well-being, for better or for worse, in each of these dimensions. So easy one first is physical well-being. Talk about how this has impacted our physical well-being.
Well, obviously, the popularity of fast food speaks to a culture that requires us to be on the go and not have the time that we probably need to cook, to luxuriate in meals, to not rush from place to place. So there's a reason why this is popular. And when you look at surveys of why fast food places are popular, when you ask their consumers, it's not because the food tastes great. Some people think it does. And, we all have our favorite items, but they look to it as the speed of service, the speed of the experience that really drives people to go for fast food more so than other options out there, because it's easy and it's quick and you know what you're going to get. So that speaks to the need that exists for fast food that you might not expect.
And it looks like we have a question here, but one thing I just want to, before we address that question, often we hear the expression that we're creatures of habit, when in fact, arguably, we're more creatures of culture. And, we live in this always on time stressed culture, as you described. And and really fast food really meets that demand. And so while it's easy for people like Michael Pollan to tell us that we just need to get back in the kitchen, that of course assumes all kinds of privilege, that we even have access to a kitchen, that we have access to going to shop at places like Whole Foods, or that we even have that amount of time to be able to cook those home cooked meals.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacques Pepin, the famous French chef, had a great saying about McDonald's, which was that people go to McDonald's to eat, not to dine. And I feel like that really does resonate with the broader American culture. People don't necessarily have the time or money to chart out a grocery list, go to a store, prepare all the food, clean up after the food, make sure if you have kids that your kids like the food. It's harder than it is. It's harder than it should be to get those things done because of how focused we are on work. So there is a lot built into the criticisms of fast food that don't really appreciate what it does that is beneficial to consumers and makes it so popular and beloved.
Well, and also how much the culture supports the fast food restaurants, and they're simply meeting that need. So we want to ask a high LP question: as wages rise and fast food becomes less affordable, will it go away? Interesting question. Over to you, Adam.
Yeah, I don't know if wages are going to be the reason why that fast food becomes less affordable so much as maybe a movement to make the enterprise more sustainable itself by maybe not maximizing the profits that require it to be so cheap. It's a convoluted way of saying that I think they could afford to pay people more and there'll be less turnover. There'll be happier employees, and those things will make fast food a better experience that will generate more profit. So I think that more affordable, better wages will probably help in the long term to make fast food better. Even though if you talk to a lot of people who are in the industry, they're very much opposed to it. So it's pretty complicated.
Yeah, and I think what you're also starting to speak to is just this notion that when we invest in the well-being of people who work for our organization, then we also invest in the bottom line, well-being at work, including financial well-being, getting paid for the work that getting paid a fair wage is not only good for people, but ultimately is good for the bottom line. I want to just bring in Robbie. Hello. And Robbie noted that some of the food does taste great. I mean, and you know, and the food, as certainly Fast Food Nation really dives into, and you did to a lesser extent, but still touching on that, it is designed to taste great. I mean, and that's really a lot of what kind of feeds into its addiction, just because it is so unbelievably good.
It hits at your pleasure centers in terms of your brain animating when you bite into a sandwich that, you know, has the right amount of sugar and the right amount of salt and savory, you know, sort of flavors that really animate you. But there's also something bigger at play that I kind of want to get into really quickly that I think we should, you know, there have been a lot of public initiatives to pressure places like McDonald's into offering healthier options. And they have, a lot of these chains have added salads to their menus only to find that people don't go to a place like McDonald's to necessarily eat a salad. They go there because they've had a tough day and they just want a Big Mac, or they want some fries. And that also speaks to, I think, a dissonance between what we expect of consumers and what we expect of businesses. And those are two separate things, because a lot of these fast food chains have tried, you know, plant-based proteins, they've tried salads and have hoped to sort of capture the market in doing so, and just haven't seen the people who actually eat fast food regularly adopt those behaviors, in part because that's not how they view it. They don't view it as, you know, eating your vegetables. They view it as something you go for when you want a special treat, or you just don't want to think about it, or something that is a ritual that is, you know, comforting. So there's a lot wrapped up in that.
Yeah, and and we talked about this before we went on the air, but just a lot of people in my industry of workplace wellness, and just also a lot of people who are interested in wellness. A lot of times we have looked at this from a biomedical perspective, and it's like if you just know your information, your numbers, the information, you identify what nutrients are in the food. You identify what's healthy and what's not, that somehow people are going to make the healthier choices. I mean, the truth of the matter is that when you see a menu and it says healthy option, you're like, ooh, that means it tastes like cardboard. I'm going to choose something else on this menu. It
Right,
seems to
right.
actually have the opposite effect.
Yeah, they've done studies on this, which is fascinating, consumer behavior, where if you see something healthier on the menu board, you actually feel more comfortable ordering something that isn't healthy because there's this vicarious health halo that exists when you see a salad on the menu. You're like, well, everything if they have a salad, then the food can't be terrible for me broadly. You make this association that's very powerful in a way. That surprises. It's a surprising thing, but it's very wrapped up in consumer behavior.
So let's talk about this whole fast food culture and its impact on our social well-being. I think this is something that I think you really delved into a lot and well in your book, but just about how these drive-throughs became a center for public life. And that they served as a gathering point, and they still serve as a gathering point for local congregation, and with a low barrier to access. And also that they've played a really prominent role in building community, even in some low income urban neighborhoods. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great feature that I think we don't perhaps understand or appreciate so much about fast food. And I drove to report this book. I drove cross country. I drove from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes, America's kind of two unsung coasts, because I wanted to sort of see what the experience was of fast food in the middle of the country. And you stop in a small town Burger King in Kansas, which is something that I did, and you see at 8 o'clock in the morning, a group of retirees hanging out, having coffee, spending hours there, just shooting it, just relaxing. And those are things that you don't necessarily realize fast food solves a problem for when it comes to social congregation. Not every retiree wants to hang out at a senior center. They want to be where there are other generations mingling. They want to be in a place that's kind of casual. You just buy a cup of coffee and you can hang out for a while. And there are not a lot of places that fulfill that obligation anymore, that aren't private somehow, or that aren't places that just don't seem designed for easy sociability. You want to be in a place where you get access to other people. And that means, especially in fast food, people of other ages, of other races, of other ethnicities, of other backgrounds in general. That is something that you see when you go into a lot of fast food restaurants, particularly in urban areas. You see people in suits, and you see people who are hungover college kids, and you see every kind of walk of life. And there are not a lot of places that actually offer that anymore. And I think that that's part of the power of the industry itself, is that it's created this meeting place for everyone. And that's harder and harder to come by.
Yeah, it's a place where there's no pretense. I mean, I notice even in the difference between going to like a Pete's Coffee versus a Dunkin' Donuts. Like
Yeah.
Dunkin' Donuts, I'm like, okay, I'm like
Right.
part of the people, and it feels like I'm having coffee with no pretension.
Absolutely. And that's something that the places that have kind of popped up to supplant fast food as the healthier alternatives. I love a salad from Sweetgreen. I know I'm eating something healthy, but when I go in there, I also know that like everyone around me is in like the nicest athleisure in the world. And it just doesn't have that, that kind of diversity that you want. So anyway, I think that that's a big part of it.
We've got a comment here. Oh my goodness. This is such an important conversation. An excellent point about them serving as a meeting place. Yeah. So let's now talk about the impact on, thank you for that, Michelle. I want to talk about the impact on financial well-being. And one of the pieces that I thought was really interesting, you quoted Roland Jones, franchise owner of, you said 3 McDonald's, and he he shared that McDonald's has made more African American millionaires than anyone else. So talk a little bit about how this has impacted our financial well-being, but both for good and for bad.
Right, right. I think using fast food as a way to kind of track American history is interesting for a lot of reasons because of the historical things we talked about, but the economic trajectory of fast food is fascinating because in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you could meet a lot of people who started out on the fryers and worked their way up, and there's a real mobility in that story that's appealing because that's very much the American dream. And that applied, like I said, really sort of discussed before, people who didn't have college degrees, people who didn't have a ton of money could plug into these systems and find a way to create a successful model for the American dream. And that wasn't just people who didn't go to high school or maybe didn't have a background in business. This was women. These were people of color. These were different communities that had been shut out of traditional financial wealth creation in the 60s and 70s that found a way to plug into their own communities and build open a store or open 2 or 3 stores and become a millionaire in a way in a time that was very unique. So there's a lot in that history that, again, is less prominent now. It's less part of the narrative of both American life and fast food, but really speaks to a time where opportunity did democratize in the sort of post-war America.
And then, to wrap us up on talking about the impact on overall well-being, one of the things that we're talking about a lot is the loneliness epidemic. And the Surgeon General came out with a report in May about the rise in the loneliness epidemic. And you describe this kind of story behind the SUV and that describing it as not only a safety hazard, but also as an isolation chamber. So this kind of rise of the SUV, these oversized big cars, combined with the rise in the ubiquitous drive-through, has really fueled a lot more isolation. So talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Part of why drive-thrus themselves became popular, especially in the 80s, which is when it flipped from being people dining in more to people going through drive-thrus more, was, the SUV is a great symbol of that, being on the road and running from place to place with your family and not necessarily having enough time to stop for a bite to eat and to interact with other people. That's a real salient part of the American experience these days is being isolated. And some of that has to do with, some of that existed long before the pandemic, and some of that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And some of that is just new generations coming up and not having the experience of socializing in an interpersonal way that they used to, that's moved online or has been kind of mediated by drive-thrus. So when we talk about the changes that have happened, I think back to going to birthday parties at McDonald's. I think back to going to playgrounds and it being an exciting opportunity to just kind of run around, and how that feels kind of fleeting and how that feels like something that is out of step with the way that we interact today. And it's sad. It's very, it's something that I wish was still a huge part of people's experiences, even if I wish it weren't necessarily through a drive-thru or through a fast food place, that there are more of those opportunities out there.
At the end of your book, you kind of sum this up saying, in its temptation and horror, fast food is a reflective pillar of a country that changes with the time and somehow manages to stay the same. Which I think is so fascinating, kind of this, constantly kind of changing sea, but at the same time, we kind of stay the same. So I wonder if in your final, giving us the top 3 takeaways that you would like our listeners to come away with, and particularly with a group of people who are in the field of health and well-being, how this connects with the work that they do. What are the top 3 takeaways, and also tying that to that one of those final quotes of yours?
Absolutely. Well, for me, one of the top takeaways is obviously to just sort of look at these developments as of fast food as something that, you know, happened because there was a need for it, you know, and when we talk about what fast food does well, there is a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can order and how you can order it and how it fits into your life, the ways that you consume it. That it's familiar, that there's ritual wrapped up in it. That is something that doesn't ask a lot of consumers to know about. And so I think that there's a lot that we can learn from what fast food companies have done by kind of capturing the mainstream and to pay attention to those specific things, because there's a lot in there that we can learn from. And that's sort of why it resonates and why it continues to resonate.
And you did such a good job of really capturing all of that. You know, so many of these different stories, but also these bigger seismic shifts that have kind of led us to where we are. I am really excited, not only about, I recommend this book to everyone, Drive-Thru Dreams, and to really get a bigger picture of kind of why we make the choices that we do, why we are eating fast food, but also why we might be feeling more lonely, or why we might have some of our sweetest childhood memories, like mine being driving through the drive-thru at Wendy's after my gymnastics workout. But also kind of understanding, you know, why it's so difficult to be able to really, quote, just make the healthy choice. Adam, you have another book that's coming out. I can't wait to read it. 99 Perspiration. Is that correct?
99% perspiration, right?
99% perspiration. And it really takes a look in the workplace. And a lot of the people who are listening in here are in the workplace. If you want to take the just 10 seconds or less to just give us a quick recap on what that is, and also what's the best way that people can stay in touch with you.
Sure. Well, I post all my writing on my website, adamchandler.com. And that's sort of, I'm a freelancer and I'm an author, so I'm constantly working on new projects. 99% Perspiration is basically about American work culture and how it's changed over the years, but also takes a long view at the history of it. And why we are this extremely driven, bootstrapping country, and how it's kind of deprived us of our connection to communities, and the focus on the individual has come at the cost to how we interact with each other. So a lot of similar themes to Drive-Thru Dreams, but a little bit more focused on how we can reclaim work from the clutches that have overtaken it in the last few decades.
I can't wait to read it. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you to all the listeners who joined us for this really interesting conversation. I can't wait to follow your work, and I'll definitely be signing up for your newsletter. I know that AJ posted that as well. Our next LinkedIn Live will be on the 28th of the next month. And we are also now streaming not only on LinkedIn, but also on Instagram and YouTube. So with that, see you all next month. Adam, thank you again for being my guest. See you all later.